The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is unprotected attack paths that allow threats to compromise vulnerable targets in the cloud and data center. But traditional microsegmentation is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation, delivering results immediately with a security outcome that's provable and management that's zero touch. Driven by machine learning, Edgewise automatically builds policies that protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network. They provide measurable improvement by quantifying attack path risk reduction and verifying software identity before it communicates to stop application compromises and data breaches. To see how to eliminate your network attack surface, visit securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to Logarithm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIEM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, Logarithm provides security made smarter. Well, welcome everyone to the Security Podcast Roundtable, which is really right now just us and the Cyberwire folks, and specifically Dave from the Cyberwire, and Matt Alderman here in studio.
Yes.
So,
hello.
Yeah, it's nice to have you in studio, Matt.
It's
You've
always
had
fun to be in
studio time, so
yeah, 2 weeks in a row, and we decided while I'm in studio, let's try to do this roundtable and talk across the different security podcast companies. Dave Bittner's with us from Cyberwire. Welcome, Dave.
Yeah, welcome, Dave.
Hello, nice to be here. Glad to join you guys.
Dave, why don't you, if you could give us a little bit about your background and how you came to be in this crazy podcast. I like to think of myself as like the eccentric, crazy podcast host because I think it's fun. But how did you come into the whole podcasting thing?
There's a lot of that in this world, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I came from more of the broadcasting side of things. I came out of school, radio, television, and film major. I was one of those folks who kind of rode that first wave of desktop digital video back in the 90s when it was first possible to actually do production on a Mac at the time. Did that for about 20 years, had my own company, and then a friend of mine reached out to me and said, hey, I work for this cybersecurity company, and we're going to be hiring someone this year who does what you do. If you want the job, let's talk. And I responded and said, well, I have a job. I have a company. I'm doing fine. He said, well, I know. Let's talk. So we talked, and it just turned out to be a good opportunity combined with what I was seeing as a real contraction, specifically on the video side of things, as a result of, everybody has a 4K video camera in their pocket now.
Right.
That market was contracting. So I had always been active on the tech side of things. I was part of that group, that original wave of 8-bit computer folks. Had a TRS-80 when I was 10 years old, and wrote my own war games dialer. I'm actually surprised that no one ever knocked on my parents' front door and said, why are you making 1,000 phone calls a night between 2 and 4 in the morning? So I had that background, but I'd been away from it for a long time. But still knew the tech side of things, computers in general. So then went back into the cyber side of things. And when I joined that company, which at the time was Cyberpoint, Baltimore cybersecurity company, I said, hey, this is, they were already publishing the Cyberwire as a daily news brief, a daily email. And I said, this is great. Have you guys thought about doing a podcast version of this? And they said, oh, that's interesting. What's a podcast? So we started doing that about 3 years ago. About 2 years ago, we got spun off into our own company, and we've been going ever since. So the podcast has grown. We've launched some new shows, got some more shows we're going to be launching, and we've been pretty successful. I feel like we're making a difference and helping people stay informed out there.
It's addicting, right? Like once you have one show, you want 2 shows, and then once you have 2 shows, like you just want more shows.
Want more shows.
Right?
Well, let me tell you, I don't know, when you're doing a daily, it's a little different than doing a weekly. And I do weeklies and dailies.
Yeah.
So, I'm up to 10 shows a week, and it's a lot. So fortunately, I have a good support crew here. We're a team of about 10 right now, and we're looking to hire some more people as we go. But the velocity, combine that with the velocity of still being very much in startup mode.
Right.
And, it's a lot, but yeah, it is. There's no question about it. It is a lot of fun. I also had a theater background. And so to be able to get behind the mic and basically do a performance every day, that pushes some of my buttons. And so I just sort of lucked into having this combination of skills and interests. People seem to enjoy what we're doing here.
It's interesting. We're so similar, both in like how we got into it in our respective organizations.
Yeah,
right? Because I think for me, the reason we got into podcasting was because you're getting your message out in one medium, and then you're like, oh, let's do this in a podcast format. And what does that look like? And I love the medium because it's very fast paced. You can be off the cuff, right? When you're writing, I feel like it's more formal and the content is presented in a more formal manner. When you're presenting, it's a shorter format and it's a different, even more formal setting, right? I had slides. I would present to the various sysadmins at the university about the latest trends in computer security so they were aware. And then, that ended or whatever, and the group shifted around, and politics at the university. And I was like, I kind of liked every week updating people on what's happening in security. And my friend Duck Sauce said, you should do a podcast. And I was like, what's a podcast? Let me get this iPod thing. It was like back in 2004. Like, get this, the first generation iPod I bought used, and started listening to podcasts. I'm like, this is really cool. I like this. And so, yeah.
And there you go. What I think is interesting about Cyberwire is you guys were doing a news kind of release, right? And a written news article, basically, and said, well, let's take that medium, right, written news, and convert that over into a podcast. You were taking live presentations that you were doing to people and said, oh, let me move that to that medium, right? And you end up in the same place, but from 2 very different kind of starting points, which is interesting. You know, you never know how a podcast gets started.
Well, and for us, I mean, the evolution of it, if you go back and listen to some of our first shows, which are still out there, they are very different than what we're doing today, because when we started out, it was just me reading the daily news brief, which interestingly enough, we've swung all the way back around to, because now I'm doing that for Alexa and all of the little devices. We're back to doing that version of our show, that concise, short daily thing. But the daily podcast, which started out just being reading that, it evolved. And because we said, well, wouldn't it be interesting if every now and then we had a guest on the show?
Yeah.
And then that went well, and we thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we had a guest on the show every day? And we started to bring on partners from academic institutions and businesses. And so it became its own thing. And we still held on to, I think one of our core values is being concise. So we still, the daily podcast is 20 minutes long, and it is not to exceed 20 minutes and maybe a few seconds here or there. But
I love it, because that's
huge. We don't ramble.
That's a huge difference, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a big difference.
And I find the audience likes different formats, right? It may be the same person at different times.
Right.
I like the, Alexa briefings if I'm, folding laundry and putting stuff away or getting ready in the morning. If I hear a quick 10-minute kind of thing about what's happening in security, that's perfect. But like I was saying earlier, when I'm on the airplane, and I'm on the airplane for a couple of hours, several hours, right? I like the long format discussion podcast, which is where we got our start, essentially.
It's a long
format discussion. And I tell you what, over the time, I've tried to break that up a little bit, and people get very mad. Because there is a huge section of the audience they like the discussion, the banter, the kind of unpredictability, and just that relaxed thing. But, Dave, as you well know, there's an audience that likes the different types of shorter formats. And
Well, and as we all know, people love change. So
Yes.
when you try to change something up, they will let you know
Right.
if
They will.
like it or not. Yes.
Yeah,
so we've spun up new shows to handle that shorter format.
Our balance is interesting because we have the long format show is the Thursday night show, the original Pulse Security Weekly, and people do not want that show to change. But we also have the shorter news segment. The news is, that's news and expert commentary. That's a 20-minute segment, right? And you will have people that want the news in that smaller format, which is great. And then we try to keep all of our other shows in their segments. But each segment we try to keep around a half an hour.
Yep.
Right? Kind of balance that. But then when you put it together, it's an hour or an hour and a half show in the case of Enterprise Security Weekly.
Yep.
But, so we try to balance that, but people do not want the original show, Pulse Security Weekly, really to change much at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, that means that you're on to something that people like, and it also means that they're tuning in because they're comfortable with you, and it's like it's like a warm bath. It's not so much matter. They're tuning in as much for hanging out with people they like as they are for the content itself.
It's very well put.
And I think
Dave.
there's something to that.
Yeah,
It's true.
it's awesome.
We wanted to talk a few trends and topics, I think.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting. Obviously we, both of our shows have sponsors, and we like to do things for our sponsors that help grow their business, right? Help increase visibility, which ultimately, really leads to more sales, right? And it was interesting. There was advice, because the market has changed a lot in the past 15 years. But there was advice that actually Mike Yaffe gave me, and he was basically all about the lead. He said at some point, Paul, and probably sooner rather than later, you got to figure out how to make this more of a lead, to tie it back to a person, to reach out to individual people. Back in the day, that spawned the mailing list kind of thing. Because back then, I didn't even want a mailing list. I'm like, we do a podcast. You can hang out on our RSC channel, and you can hang out on a forum. I don't want to know any of your information, right? But with sponsored demand, we very much had to balance, all the way up to today, how we guide people to listening to our shows, to basically turning that into a sale for our sponsors. And that journey's certainly been interesting. And how we in security specifically do leads and not make people feel creepy is very difficult, because we're a skeptical bunch here in security, as
That's right.
Dave can attest to as well, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think people have their guard up, and they don't like feeling as though they're being sold to. So we try to have everything be kind of informational. In other words, our podcast has ads, right? We have commercials, and they are separate from the rest of the content, and those ads pay for everything. But we also have guests on our show who are from companies, and we don't allow people to come on to overtly promote products or services. But if you're coming on and you're talking about a trend that's happening these days, we're framing you as an expert in that space. So there's something to be said for that as well. In terms of lead generation, I think that's really interesting, because it seems to me like different companies come at that from different ways. And I think a lot of times it speaks to the maturity of the company and the folks who are handling the marketing and the sales, where they are in their own evolutionary journey of the company. You've got some people who don't understand that if your show has 25,000 listeners, why aren't they getting 25,000 phone calls?
Right.
Right. And then you have other people who think, we're not expecting anything direct from this. We're just building awareness. This is part of a broader strategy combined with everything else, where, people might walk up to us. We hear this a lot. People might walk up to us on the show floor at RSA or something like that and say, "Oh, I heard about you guys on the Cyberwire."
Yep.
So they didn't reach out for a direct sales call, but rung a bell in their mind that, "Oh, right, I'm familiar with you," and there's value in that.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting what people's different expectations are. And I think it's important for us to help set those expectations. I don't know, how do you guys handle that?
Yeah,
Well, it's hard to measure, right? And so we try and tell people, because we do the advertising component as well, and we try and tell people, they're like, well, how do I measure that? And Dave, your example is classic. And I'm like, you got to go to your show floor, and you got to ask the people who worked at your booth at these conferences and ask them, did anyone come up and say, hey, I heard about you on Cyberwire, I heard about you on Security Weekly? Maybe they heard about it on both, right? Which is totally fine. People listen to more than one podcast. It's great, right?
Yeah.
We want to drive the right people to the right sponsors to find the right solutions. And then the sponsor has to measure that. And sometimes that's just talking to your team. And they're like, yeah, people come up and say, they listen to all these podcasts. And, that's why they came to the booth. But the struggle of it as podcasters is that's hard for us to measure, right?
It is.
Well,
it can be. I mean, one of the things, I think a lot of it goes back, Dave, to maturity. The maturity of the marketing program.
Yeah.
Because the best we can do as podcasters is create a marketing qualified lead, an MQL. We can't control the sales process from that point to a sales qualified lead to an opportunity to a closed deal, right, in the pipeline. And some organizations, especially on the startup side of cybersecurity, their marketing programs aren't that mature yet.
They don't have that workflow.
Right. They don't have that MQL to SQL to opportunity to close tracking down. And so it gets really hard for them. So we try to do things to measure aspects of who's taking action and what they're doing based on what they hear on the podcast.
Yeah.
But it's not that easy sometimes, especially when you don't have a very mature marketing program on the other side.
Right. Right. I think it's also really interesting that I'm sure you guys have experienced this. You'll have two different advertising customers. One will come back to you and they'll say, oh my gosh, this was amazing. We got so many leads. It hit it out of the park. I want to buy as much as I possibly can. And then you'll have someone else who say, yeah, just didn't really work out for us. Thanks. We tried it. Wasn't a good fit. And so you're left kind of reverse engineering and saying, okay, same space, right? Same audience. Some people, and so part of that, what I'm getting to is that part of that is what message they're putting out there.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
We try to provide guidance on, hey, this is what we've found works for our audience. And some people take that advice. Some people don't take that advice. Some people dial it in. It's sometimes it's frustrating when someone asks you to do something that you think, not sure this is going to work.
Right.
And, but you do your best to kind of shepherd them towards success, but,
it's
sometimes,
tough.
well, in that situation, I'll sometimes push them into doing different activities, right? And it's amazing when you bring a guest from a sponsor on the show, how amazing that can be for them, right? Because we've established security is a skeptical bunch. When I'm a security professional, I'm defending an enterprise, and I hear someone from a security vendor, come on, I just have a frank conversation with any of us, right? From any show. I'm like, first of all, that's cool that you're, maybe the CEO or founder, VP, head engineer, whoever it is, you're coming down, sitting and doing a podcast. That's cool. Having a great conversation. I learned something. Therefore, now in my brain, when I go shopping, right, that's towards the top of the list, because I feel sales is all about having a relationship. And I feel like that guest appearance gives them that relationship.
Right. They contributed value.
Right.
Exactly.
They helped make me smarter. They helped me do my job better. They weren't just trying to sell me something. They're they're contributing to the community.
Yeah, trying to educate people. We really try to focus on problem solution value here. Is if the sponsor can't articulate the problem they're solving, how they solve it uniquely or differently than others in the space, and really extract out some of that value that you get using those solutions, I think it gets really tough for the listener to engage, because they're like, well, I don't know if I have that problem. But if you can articulate that problem and see value in what they're doing, that's where I think the magic happens. And that is not easy to track and measure, Dave. I mean, we've done a lot of things in our programs. I've been here almost a year now officially. I mean, I've been working with Paul for years as kind of guest co-hosting here and there. But having been in the business for almost a year now with Paul, we've learned a lot of things about how to craft our programs a little differently around that kind of brand awareness, thought leadership, and lead generation that we're trying to do. And we've taken some data and some metrics and tried to build better programs for our sponsors to say, this is what we see working for others, so let me kind of bundle this together and see if we can do that with you as well. And so that's the stuff we've learned over the last year or so.
I think there's also an element that's important to recognize, which is there's a big difference between the company who's selling a $1,000 widget and the company who's selling a $100,000 a year service.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm selling that $100,000 a year service, one person walks up to me at a trade show and says, I heard about this on this podcast, sign me up. That's different than having to sell to 1,000 people who are buying a $1,000 widget, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's interesting because we're still, insecurity is still a niche within a niche, right? And I think some companies come to you and say, well, I want to do this like I did at my previous job when I worked for a gigantic company and we were selling to consumers and we advertised on a podcast that was speaking to consumers in a general sense that aren't really specialized, and we had great success with it. I'm like, this is a different ball game, right? We're a niche within a niche, and you have to target your niche. You have to target the right person who's going to buy that $100,000 product that's going to solve their problems for them. It's not selling that even $1,000 thing to, hundreds of thousands of people and solving their problems at a mass scale where you need a podcast that has millions and millions of downloads maybe per episode, right? And that's cool. That's a model. And we've also been very lucky that podcasting has gone nothing but success for the past 20, 15, maybe 20-ish years. I don't think 20, I think it's less than 20 years that podcasting has really been kind of a more of a mainstream thing.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd say it's probably the last decade or so that it's taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken its place, maybe is a better way to say it in terms of people taking advertising on podcasts and engaging with audiences through podcasts more seriously. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's been an interesting evolution because if we think about, our download numbers, for example, and tracking that and seeing how that adoption continues to grow. We even had a show that we tried to target more on the consumer side that it just wasn't our audience, right? It's something we tried, but it wasn't. We don't reach out to that more consumer market. We're really talking to the enterprise practitioners and the enterprise organizations that are trying to defend the organization. We don't, at least in our audience, we really don't have that consumer play.
Katie Mazzara said it best.
Yeah.
She's like, my kids ask me, they're like, Mom, are you famous? And she's like, in a very small subset of people, yes, I'm a recognizable person. And that's how I explain it to my kids too.
There's a line in the old movie To Be or Not to Be where they're talking about someone and he says, well, he's world famous in Poland.
Right. Yes. That's pretty much
We're world famous in cybersecurity. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's funny. Very little tiny celebrity, but
yes. Agreed.
Do we want to let's talk about some trends in security?
Yeah. What are some of the big trends that are happening?
Ransomware is I want to start there just because it's so prolific today.
It's in the news every week.
Every day. I covered a story the other day where a medical facility, I don't know if it was like a walk-in kind of practice or whatever in California, had actually closed its doors. I don't know, Dave, if you saw that one as well.
Yeah, there was one here in the U.S. and there was one in Australia where they could not take new patients because the systems were victims of ransomware. So yeah, life-threatening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're also seeing them hit cities and municipalities.
Yep.
Same thing. I mean, the interesting thing there is that they've got a lot of cases with those organizations. They are legally bound to provide certain services.
Right.
You have to be able to pay your water bill. You have to be able to have these services. So they have the pressure to bring those back quickly. And so you get the double whammy of that. And, as everybody who's worked for local government knows, they don't have unlimited budgets.
Right.
For this sort of thing. So it's a tough lesson to learn, I think, for them. And
we've seen some interesting trends with the municipalities. When all those hit down in Florida, you had the cities paying the ransom through their cyber insurance policies. But then we saw some shifts, New Bedford, Mass, down in Texas, where they didn't pay the ransom. They actually went to their backups and did system restore. So we've seen some interesting shifts, even in that ransomware attack profile of people who are paying ransoms, and then you saw those ransoms start to go up, Dave. I mean, the one in New Bedford was like $2.5 million or $5 million. I can't remember what it was.
Countered? Did New Bedford counter?
Yeah, they countered, and the ransomware folks said, no, we want the original, and they said, forget it, and they ended up restoring their system, same down in Texas. So we've seen some interesting moves, which will be interesting to continue to watch in the space, is who's paying ransoms, because my fear is the more ransoms you pay, right, over time, the people who are doing the attacks are going to start to ask for more because they see these payouts starting to happen. They see cyber insurance policies, paying out these funds. But then you have some that say, no, we're not going to pay those really crazy ransoms, and we're just going to restore. It'll be interesting to see how that continues to trend.
Yeah, I think just yesterday we were talking about on our show about this notion of considering a ransomware attack to be the same sort of thing as a natural disaster. So imagine that your facility was knocked out of commission because of a hurricane or a flood, that you didn't have access to the things you needed, that you can think about ransomware in the same way. How are you prepared for a hurricane or a flood? Think about ransomware, your preparation for ransomware in a similar way. If tomorrow, all of a sudden, you had to be up and running at a different facility because your facility is destroyed, how would you do that? And I think that's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, back to the old business continuity disaster recovery plans. Right? Yeah, we almost forgot about them for a while, if you think about it. Right back
we put it all in the cloud. It's all in the cloud,
all taken care of. But I remember in the late '90s building the business continuity disaster recovery plans for the Alliance Refinery, which when I worked for SAIC, who had the BP outsourcing contract. But we kind of forgot about business continuity disaster recovery for a while. Ransomware makes it almost a requirement because you have to treat it like a disaster recovery in some respects.
Right. Yeah, I think backup solutions are probably today smart enough to be able to give people a course for recovery. And I think the issue is a lot of these backup solutions aren't the same in every municipality, aren't the same in every healthcare organization, and don't have access to some of those resources that could really help them. And, I've said on shows that I think the government at various levels should step in and make those resources available through a program where if you're in healthcare, right, I think the government should subsidize something to say you can be part of this program where you can have a backup solution. It's never going to be 100% resilient to attacks, but resilient to 90% of the ransomware that's out there, and that's a 50% cost because it's being subsidized to help preserve the infrastructure here in the U.S. or really any country.
Yeah, and I think both the Senate and the House have passed some legislation recently. I think it's in committee.
Take time to,
but there is some legislation out there to actually provide some help to the municipalities. So there is some federal assistance coming at some point.
Right.
So like a FEMA for
kinda
for ransomware.
Yeah. I think it's part of DHS that one of the DHS programs is going to be available to cities and municipalities. I think that's how the law was written, but it's in committee because the version in the House and the Senate are different, so they have to reconcile, and then it would go up for signature. But
it's interesting too. I mean, what if it's? I'm imagining some sort of cyber version of the Army Corps of Engineers, building levees and so forth to protect folks from floods. A proactive approach, rather than just coming up and helping to clean up the mess.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It needs resources available.
Needs to be infrastructure that people can utilize to basically strengthen their IT infrastructure to be more resilient.
Right. Yeah. It's a resiliency play at the end of the day. What else you got on your list? You had a couple more on there.
Well, the skills shortage is always a favorite topic, right?
Okay, so let's start with some basics here, because some people are skeptical that the skills shortage is actually a thing. What's your take on that?
Well, we actually had a great webcast with ISC Squared. When was that? July?
Yeah, I think if you had any doubts, that's the webcast to turn to.
That webcast was great because ISC Squared went out and
What was his name? He did all the research.
Yeah, he
too.
did all the research.
Yeah.
And they had a very broad research project where they went out and came up with a way to measure what is the skills gap. Because to your point, Dave, this has been debated back and forth. Do we have one? How big is it, et cetera? But ISC Squared said, look, we went out, we talked to a lot of organizations. They came up with a formula, and their math says 2.93 million. And so they've done this survey, they've done this study, great webcast on this that we did in July that kind of walks through that 2.93 million and where they are. Because what I think is interesting, Dave, is in the U.S., I think the number was like 400,000. But when you look overseas, you look to Europe and Asia, Asia has the biggest skill set gap. And I think that's partially because of maybe the maturity of where security is in the Asia Pacific region versus Europe and here in the United States. But that was a great way to really break it down and understand, is there a shortage, which they say, yes, there is, and they measured it. But where is that shortage? And it's not as much here in the U.S. A lot of it seems to be overseas.
How much do you think the shortage could be self-inflicted? And what I mean is this, that I hear from a lot of people, my co-host on the Hacking Humans podcast, Joe Kerrigan, he's from Johns Hopkins. So he's, with the students a lot. And what they're hearing is that organizations aren't willing to train people, that the true entry-level jobs are few and far between, where you see entry-level job must have 5 years of experience. Entry-level job must have these certifications. And so if we as a community aren't willing to train up those people on our own, we expect them to come to us with 5 years of experience. How can we expect to fill those positions?
I'm fully with you.
Anything to that?
Yeah, I think there is. I think the way we write the job descriptions and the requirements we put into the job descriptions only shoots ourselves in the foot of bringing new talent into the industry, because they don't have the 5 years of expertise. They don't have the CISSP. They don't have the bachelor's of science in an engineering curriculum, for example. So I think part of it is we are writing job descriptions wrong for some of these entry-level roles. Think about a SOC 1 analyst, right? That's where a lot of the gap, I think, is, because a lot of people are trying to staff up their SOCs. Do I need somebody with a CISSP and a bachelor's of science degree? Maybe not, because if I've got a program in place and I can get them in, they can learn, then over time their skill set's going to move up and they're going to move up into a higher level role. So I do believe the way we write the job descriptions, we define the requirements in the role, actually is hurting the industry a bit.
I'm intrigued by this notion of bringing in people from other disciplines, of reaching out to those music majors, the people who have skills in creative thinking and problem solving that might not be traditional computer science folks, but that there are plenty of positions that those people could fill with the skills that they have, if you're willing to think outside the box and also willing to invest in training them up for the specific jobs that you have available.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that a couple of things that are good that are happening now that we need more of, right? One are programs like Cyber Patriot and similar programs that are taking youth and pushing them down and giving them a path, right, to be in this field is very important. I think there also needs to be an aptitude test, right, for a lot of different disciplines, cybersecurity included, because I agree, Dave, you don't necessarily need a heavy technical background to be effective in this field. It's more about that critical thinking and that hacker mindset than anything else. So,
I also I saw something that really stuck with me last week about the diversity side of the equation and the importance of bringing people onto your team so that you have a range of thinking. You're solving problems from a bunch of different points of view. And the one that I heard about, it's about a week ago, was someone was talking about Google Maps and being able to have walking directions in Google Maps. And someone brought up the point that, wouldn't it be great to have a feature in Google Maps where it could route you from point A to point B on a walking path, but it knew where the well-lit streets and sidewalks were to keep you out of harm's way. And someone made the point that chances are, if you didn't have any women on your team, this might not come up, because it's not something that guys tend to think about nearly as much as women do. There's safety walking around by themselves at night. And it just struck me as a really good example of why this kind of thinking is important, that you'll get approaches to problems that you wouldn't have gotten when you have a variety of people contributing to solving those problems.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of modeling that happens, right? When we talk about threat modeling as a thing, but as a pen tester, you're modeling attacks. And as a defender, you're modeling defensive tactics, right? And so that modeling in all three areas, right, requires a lot of creativity, critical thinking, and people from different backgrounds to bring up all those things in those different scenarios.
Right.
And so, it's super, super important to have.
It reminds me when my wife and I, when our oldest was coming up, and it came time that we had to think about things like parental controls on computers and so forth. And I remember us having the conversation saying, we can probably outsmart him, but there's no way we're going to outsmart him and all of his friends combined.
Right.
Yeah, my daughter's example was perfect, right? I used to have the controls locked down on the router so that it would shut off their devices at a certain time. And my daughter figured out how to pop my Wi-Fi and turn the restrictions off at like 14, right? And it's like, creativity. She's hospitality management. She's not in an engineering discipline, but she figured out how to pop my Wi-Fi and turn off restrictions. So
and on the one hand you want to punish them, but on the other hand you want to up their allowance because they're being creative. And
exactly right.
My oldest son is the hacker, and there's lots of stories. I mean, you can't keep that kid out of anything. And I keep my office door locked at home, so we can put stuff in there that we don't want the kids getting at. And I also give him education too. I'm like, look, just don't go in there, right? But he gets curious, and so his brothers rat him out all the time. And so his brothers are like, yeah, he used a crowbar to get in your office. I'm like, wait, he got in? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, I'm really proud. It's really not cool that he did that, but I'm like, I'm really proud right now that he actually got in. I'm like, that's
I think he
cool.
can lockpick now too, right?
He can lockpick. But it's funny. He realizes he's 11 that it doesn't matter how you get in as long as you get in. And he could have tried and guessed the code. He could have lockpicked, but he was like, you know what? I got a crowbar. I can go in. Dad's crowbar is right up there in the garage, and popped it and got in. I'm like, that's a proud moment.
It'll be interesting to see what sort of hard lessons he learns along the way in terms of boundaries and guardrails and whose lock he decides to pick. And because I don't know.
And there's a lot of education, that has to happen. That I hope all parents are doing with that, that respect. I know many of us in security, when we teach our kids lock picking and other things, we have to teach morals, ethics, values along with that. And permission is very important thing.
Use your skills for good, not evil.
Right. And he didn't do it. I really think he just wanted to do it just to see if he could do it. Right. Because he didn't do it. And once he got in the office, it was a challenge.
Yeah. Locked door. I'm going to get through it.
Right. So now we have cameras.
Exactly. You got one more on that list we should cover?
Yeah. Do we want to cover maybe automation?
Yeah, that's
automation kind of cover. We can go in a lot of different directions.
Oh yeah. Machine learning and artificial intelligence and automation and that whole
evolution of it, right? And I really think it comes down to, for many of us, we were burned by automation early on,
years ago,
and because it wasn't very smart, and we sent out those commands to update every server, and it went horrible. The technology wasn't as evolved to be able to do things at scale when it comes to IT and sysadmin. But now, today, I think a lot of that has changed. I think the technology is better. The tools are better. The software is better. We've integrated more AI and machine learning. And I know those are buzzwords, but when done correctly, really, really do help us.
Yeah, I was talking just yesterday. I was talking to a venture capitalist guy out of Israel, and I was asking him what's hot and what's not. and he was saying that AI and machine learning are not hot right now because people sort of roll their eyes about it. They feel like there was so much hype and people got burned. Everybody jumped on that bandwagon. It was probably 2 years ago at RSA where every single booth was,
Right.
Yep, we're going to solve all the world's problems with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And there are some companies who are doing really interesting, legitimate work in that space, but everybody jumped on that bandwagon. And so now I think when you hear someone say that, you're automatically skeptical because there was so much snake oil out there when it came to that.
Yeah, everybody used the terms, and one of the things we noticed was as soon as you said the term machine learning or artificial intelligence, kind of turned people off. What I think organizations have to do now, vendors have to do, is talk about what are the different types of machine learning, artificial intelligence routines are they using, and how are they actually solving the problem? And we're starting to see more of that, Dave. In some of our interviews now, we kind of get into the specifics more about what are you using, what are you actually doing, and if you can start to articulate those routines that you're using and how you're using them to solve the problem, then you can get away with talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence instead of at this high kind of level of
what's
of
interesting,
hype.
and a lot of it is like pseudo machine learning. And sometimes that's okay. I'm like, that's just a really smart way and approach to solve the problem. It doesn't necessarily have to be a very well-defined. It could be pseudo machine learning, and a lot of people have pseudo machine learning that is complete crap. But some are like, this is our approach, and yeah, we call it machine learning. They're pretty frank about it, right? It's not really machine learning, but you're like, I like that approach. That would work to solve my problem, right? And it's differentiating the two.
Yeah, if it does what you say it's going to do, and it saves me time and money, that's great. Everybody wins, right?
Yeah, you don't have to stretch it and call it, machine learning.
Yeah, because I think from an automation perspective, this ties into the whole skills gap debate a little bit as well, Dave, in that, I think some people are trying to see if they can leverage automation to fill the skills gap, but then people are worried, well, does automation replace my job? And so you've got this really interesting dynamic between this whole concept of automating certain routines and the whole skills gap thing. I think if you do automation correctly, it can make your existing resources more efficient. You can use those resources to do higher level activities like threat hunting and some of the other things that we see out there, and maybe fill in part of that skills gap. But when you disconnect the two, sometimes I think there's this really weird kind of scenario out there of like, well, automation is just going to replace all of our jobs. No, I think there's still jobs to have under automation.
I think if you can put the interesting jobs in front of people, in other words, take away that busy work, take away the grunt work, the boring tasks, the repetitive tasks. Let the automation handle that. Let the automation filter through that, and then present your analyst with, here are the top 10 things we think you need to look at, or even here we've prioritized these based on what we think needs your immediate attention or not. That has real value, and that's going to be fulfilling to the people doing the jobs, because nobody enjoys doing busy work. You're going to have a much better day. You're going to feel better about your job if you're doing interesting, challenging work.
Right.
That has variety, that makes you feel like you're really contributing at the end of the day, rather than just chasing your tail and trying to filter out all of the signals that are coming in all at once, like a fire hose.
I was fortunate when I was 19 or 20 years old. I worked with someone, and she was a software developer and very skilled in also IT stuff, and I was doing the IT stuff with her, and she said, look, the first thing you got to know is you want to script and automate and document yourself out of your job. I'm like, what? That doesn't, like, when you're 19 or 20, that didn't make sense. And she explained it to me. She's like, if you can show that you're really good at something, you can automate it and document it, hand that off to someone else, that means you're moving on to the next thing all the time, moving on to the next thing, moving on to the next thing. If you can prove to the company you work for that you can do that, they're going to give you more things. You're going to document it, automate it, and allow other people to do it, and then they're going to give you the next thing. And so that stuck with me. through my whole career. And I think that's the lesson that a lot of us need to understand today coming into the field, is that we need to do those same things, especially in security.
Yeah. And if we think about it from our business for a second, Paul, I mean, we do that anyways. I mean, in order for us to, Dave, like you, right, add more shows, publish more content, there's a level of automation we want to achieve in our daily business process so that we can continue to scale and do the things we enjoy doing, which is this, versus, you know, all the back office stuff. And so there's a level of automation we want to bring into the business to be more efficient.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. When we started using a scheduling service, you know, we use an online scheduling software platform, and such a lifestyle upgrade, not having to go through, well, what time are you available? I'm available then. Are you available then? Well, let me check. Oh, well, he's not available then. No, people can just go on. They can see my availability.
20, 30 emails just to get a guest on the show without any kind of automation, right?
They just go and they choose a time, and it shows up on my calendar, and everybody's good. And I mean, yay.
Right.
It's just great. So seeking those things out, trying to find those efficiencies so that you're, like you said, so you're doing the things that you enjoy doing. You're doing the things that are fun. And letting the automation handle the things that aren't so much fun. I give me more of that.
Yeah, I'll take more of that any day.
Absolutely. Well, folks can find, of course, Dave's podcasts and others that you work with at thecyberwire.com. Is that right? Did I get that right?
That is correct. Thecyberwire.com. Yep.
Fantastic. Well, Dave, it's been a lot of fun. We should do this more often. I
loved it. Thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That will conclude this version of the Roundtable. Looking forward to more. Thank you, everyone.